Welcome to the Visionaries Only podcast presented by Energy 11 and hosted by me, Jay Thomas. This is episode 5 with Jaslyn Ferguson. She is not only a friend and a former colleague, she is an ex-marketer for Twitter. And also she started this company called Historifi. And it's an augmented reality platform meant to educate people on I don't want to pigeonhole it to just Tulsa, where she's located, but she's located there, and the idea sort of originated based on the history of Tulsa and really being able to tell the story, most famously the story of the riots that happened there, the burning of Black Wall Street. So we had a really interesting conversation around, firstly, her time at Twitter, being laid off. We talked about the mass layoffs in tech, the bleeding of the tech industry. I personally think it's going to be one of those things that we remember as we get older, like those sort of like staple moments, right? Like COVID was huge, obviously. And then I think we're going to remember this time of like not augmented reality, artificial intelligence coming to the forefront of society. We're going to remember that this was sort of like the cusp of artificial intelligence, because in 10 years, we're probably not going to know a life without it. So we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about Historifi and the building of this company and sort of the growing pains of building something from the ground up, especially with no experience of building things prior. So we kind of talked a lot about that, and actually really bonded on that because it's a sort of a shared experience for the both of us, and a lot more. So please enjoy the episode. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of great chemistry because, that's really my friend. And as always, please subscribe, like, rate us on Apple, Spotify, etc., wherever you listen to your podcasts, and above all, enjoy. I want to start with what you were doing previously before we get into what you're doing now with Historifi.
Okay.
You're working at Twitter, first ever inclusive marketing programs manager. What?
Yes.
Well, I'll say this. I was incredibly sad when you got that role, but also incredibly happy for you. You were the first ever to have that role at Twitter, which was groundbreaking. But also, I was losing
maybe the last. No.
No, seriously though. There's some pride in that, right? No one will ever step into your shoes because they literally can't. But I was losing my co-host, my partner in crime, to actually get the show up and running. And now that I'm doing all of this on my own, I'm like, this is really the job of like 3 people. But when you did get that role, what did it mean to you at the time? And can you talk about a little bit what your role consisted of?
Yeah. So I was, as you said, the inclusive marketing programs manager. So at the time, Twitter had a program called Twitter Prism. I'm sure you could probably still Google it. They probably haven't wiped it from the face of the earth just yet, but it was basically a program that just kind of pulled together and put a nice packaged bow on all of the different ways that advertisers that work with Twitter could make sure that their ads were inclusive and representative of people, especially from historically excluded communities. So that could be people of color, right? Black folks, that could be people that are in the Latinx community. It could be disabled folks. It could also be people within the LGBTQ plus community, right? So anyone, right? We're looking at solutions to help our advertisers to say, hey, if you're going to make an ad, here's how you can work with creators from these different backgrounds, or here's how you can tell these unique stories. So I thought it was such a unique program, right? And there's such a need for that in the industry, because working in marketing and specifically working with social media, I had seen firsthand that there were a lot of times where you would have campaigns, or you would be working on a certain project. And sometimes what happens is a lot of these large companies, no matter who they are, they say they want to do a campaign, and it really just depends on who's in the room, right, making those decisions. And if there isn't somebody that's in the room that's saying, hey, we need to be inclusive, we need to have people who represent all these different backgrounds, that's where it can be tricky. And so when the platform itself, right, like a Twitter, says, hey, we're going to help you to be inclusive, then it takes away some of that need for the company themselves to, they still need to obviously strive to have representation in every, boardroom that they have. But if they're not there yet, it's great for the platform to be able to step in and say, hey, here's what you can do, and here's how we can help you connect the dots. Hey, we work with these creators. Here are people you can work with. So I was extremely excited to embark on that role and that journey, because I knew what that meant, not just for Twitter, not just for these companies, but for the industry as a whole. When we're looking at social media ads, right, when we're looking at advertising in general, I always talk to people about the importance of having representation in those ads, and that it's a deeper problem than a lot of people think. So I was super excited about it. I loved what the role was. And it wasn't just me that was working on that project, right? So I was brought in to manage the program as a whole, but there were already people who had really done the hard work to get the program started, and they looked at every facet of the company and every type of ad, and they were like, okay, here's how we can make sure that these are inclusive, and here's what we can do on the end of like creators, right? Every time a company comes to us, we give them x amount of creators, and we make sure that there's a certain percentage mix, all of these things of looking at making sure that we were doing our job to make sure that ads were inclusive, to help our partners. So cool role. But now it is, of course, no more.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you joined at a wild time in Twitter. It was a wild time, with the whole sale of the company, Elon, just Eloning. How were you able to concentrate on your work as things were going on?
So I was in I would say a a place mentally where, I don't know, I guess in that point in my career. So prior to working for Twitter, obviously we worked together at Flatiron School, and that was a company that was having its own sort of growing pains, or rearranging things. And before that, I had worked for other companies that were trying to figure out their footing. So at that point in my career, although I was distracted to a certain degree of having it so high profile, right? You turn on the news and I'm like, this is weird. This is my place of work and people are talking about it. It was distracting in a sense, but at the same time, I felt like I was also kind of mentally in a place of like, this is what companies do. And, we've seen that it's almost like right now in in the end of 2022 and going into 2023, there have been a lot of companies that have laid folks off. It almost just feels like this is the season of that happening. And so it was distracting to a sense, excuse me, of it being so high profile. But I definitely think, I don't know, maybe it's just where I'm at personally in life. I'm just kind of like, it is what it is.
It's above me now. It's above me. It's just above me.
Yeah.
Um, I I totally get you. I think we have gotten to a point as professionals, especially in our age group, um, especially because like
Hmm.
the we were here for the rise of these giant tech companies that uh, we know as Fang, and we're just kind of accustomed to a certain level of dysfunction. Like that's, I mean, it's tough to say, but
Yeah.
we're just
Yeah.
kind of accustomed to. We grew up in the startup era, right? And we are just as we grew up in the startup era, and we grew up in like hustle culture era. So those two
Yeah.
things, that combination, man, it changes your perspective on stuff. Because I just saw there was a stat. It was on LinkedIn. Somebody posted that between, I don't want to get the companies wrong, but I think I'm right when I say between Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Amazon, they've laid off 53,000 people.
Wow.
Bruh, that's insane.
That's
Like,
that's a lot. Wow.
they making these government jobs look good. I'm telling you, like making these government, you know,
Yeah, I mean, it's like a weird sign of the times, and like you said, I think because we're millennials, we're in this unique position of, like you said, seeing the rise and now kind of seeing, trouble in paradise. So it's definitely interesting to watch as things kind of unfold and we see how things evolve and where that nets out. Um, you know, in thinking about my role specifically, again, I was excited because I felt like, okay, we're bridging into the space, and it wasn't just Twitter. Meta has its own stuff for creators and their own resources and things that they put out centered around inclusion and making sure that advertisers know that they should be inclusive and things like that. But I felt like we were finally in a place where things were established enough that we could really have those conversations. And now it just definitely feels like, oh nope, now they've had to basically scale down to like a skeleton crew.
right?
you know um
It's bad
yeah.
when a company like Microsoft says, "You know what, guys? We're gonna try to do a lot more with less." It's like, you guys are a
Yeah.
billion-dollar company. What the hell do you mean you're gonna do more with less?
Is that what they said? That's the statement they put
That's
out.
a statement. That's it. That's the caption. Like that was it.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
when you think about the layoffs, because I've been thinking about this pretty deeply.
Yeah.
I was one of the people impacted with the tech layoffs. When you think about the
Mm,
layoffs, I got real introspective after, and I'm wondering, how did you
mm.
internalize what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so at the time it was happening, you know, I feel like I was really zeroed in a lot on just like, okay, well, what are my next steps? What am I going to do? What does this look like? There was just so much noise I felt around the situation. I just, was trying to just kind of figure out like what are next steps for me. But as time has kind of gone on and I've taken a step back and looked at things, and also my sister was affected as well. And she was laid off from the company she worked for. And, for me, some of the biggest takeaways are I mean, like, moving forward, I always have to, like, I'm a side hustle person by nature. There's a lot of times in my career I've had side hustles, done freelance and things, but I feel like this is just a nice reminder that, it's always nice to have something else going because you can't always put your whole life or your whole, potential um financial stability all in one basket. It's sad to say that, but especially in the society that we live in, like, we can't we and in being in an industry where, if you're going for jobs in these tech companies or startups, you know it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of reward because a lot of these companies are the ones that, they pay more, or they have the good benefits, or, they're very appealing in many ways. However, at the end of the day, I'm just realizing, like, a corporation's a corporation, and they all are going to have their issues. And whether it's a layoff today, or, just, some other catastrophe tomorrow, it's, I feel my biggest takeaway was just like, this is what companies do, and I, we have to, put our trust in them to, for our livelihood. But for me, that just became like all the more like, come on, Jaslyn, you got to get some side hustles going. You got to have something else always running in the background,
Hence the podcast was born. Absolutely.
Yes, I see you. I see you.
Man, I it resonates with me, everything you're saying, because that was a big takeaway for me as well, right? You spend all this time, you spend all this we spend money, at least I spend money to get to the place I got to get to for work. You spend money on lunch every day at work. So you spend money, time, resources, etc. at these companies. And I have no shame in saying that I absolutely loved the company I worked for prior. A company called Orchard, real estate tech company. I loved the people I worked with. It was amazing.
Oh.
So it was devastating when I realized maybe 3 weeks before the layoffs that something was amiss. Something just wasn't adding up. And in that time, I started to like mentally prepare myself for what I felt was going to happen. Call it intuition, whatever it was. And I started thinking to myself how short-sighted and silly it is to have lofty goals while simultaneously relying on someone else exclusively for your financial stability.
Yes.
Right? Those two things can't coexist. So I was setting my own self up for failure. I was saying I was going to do the podcast, and I was getting to it, but I was getting to it so slowly. I was putting these things in place. I was kind of taking my sweet time.
Right.
And when you get put into a position where there is no other choice, you can't. Personally, after I went through my moments of the emotional reaction, I started to feel like this was the push that you actually need, and this is like the somebody said this is your origin story. So
yes, exactly. Oh my god, I feel you 1,000% on that. I honestly had mixed feelings when everything happened, because obviously nobody wants to lose their job, but at the same time, it's always a struggle when you're trying to start things, when you're trying to do things, but you're giving 99.9% of your time or energy into this one job. And so, then you're like, okay, I have no time for anything else. So, well, now we have time for other things.
Right. Nothing but space and opportunity, right?
Yes.
I've always operated under the perspective of like, I mind a business that pays me. And as long as the business was paying me, I would continue to mind that over my own. But like you, I came to the conclusion that like this was a big realization for me. I said, a company could pay me $1 million a year. I will still own my own business on the side. And it was that realization. Now, granted, unless I magically grow, 6 inches and decide to go to the NBA, I'm probably not going to make $1 million a year at a company. But the amount of money you can make as an entrepreneur is limitless. So it's like, why would I not pursue this avenue? And here we are. So, yeah.
Here we are.
So you started your own company as well, which of course you would. No one is surprised by that. So talk to me about the motivation behind starting, or rather co-founding, We'll get that right. Your
Yep.
augmented reality platform, Historifi.
Yeah. So Historify was actually um it came to life. It started my mom had the idea. My mom is like my mentor. She's the reason why I'm in marketing. She's always been in marketing, and so we've always had a dynamic where if one of us has like a business idea, then it's on. Like we start brainstorming different ideas and talking about how we could do different things with it. And so one day, many, many years ago, actually, she had this idea of, she was like, what if you used augmented reality to um, like tell the story of history, right? And so that was when the idea was kind of halfway born. So that was an idea of hers, and I thought it was cool, and we would talk about it from time to time. But it wasn't until probably 2019, 2020-ish. No, 2019 for sure, I think. For sure, I think. But my my mom and I, we both were working on a freelance project. So we were contracted by the city of Eatonville, Florida, and they are credited as being the first Black incorporated town in the United States. So quick history lesson for yeah, quick history lesson for anyone. But Black towns came about because obviously we were still in segregated times, and so, in that kind of reconstruction period, there were a lot of towns that sprung up all across the nation that were successful, that had a lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of they were very self-sustained. But obviously with history, right, a lot of these towns have since been destroyed. And so even if they are still standing, a lot of them are a shadow of what they once were. And Eatonville is definitely one of those towns where it again, it was one of the first. And a lot of people know it because Zora Neale Hurston, the famed author, writer of the book Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is a book I read in high school, and I lived in Central Florida. But that book, and I never knew, well, I mean, I knew this, but like it didn't really click. But it was, Eatonville, Florida was right there. It's like literally like right there in Orlando. And so but it again, it's a shadow of what it once was. It's not this bustling town with all these Black owned businesses. Yeah, there are Black owned businesses, but it's really sad to see that a lot of you can tell that they're not getting the resources. They're, the folks living there, I'm sure that their home values and all of these things are not what we would want to see from a town that was built and had kind of risen from the ashes. But what happened with a lot of these towns was either they were just literally physically destroyed, or they were destroyed in other ways, right? Desegregation happened, and you would have certain cities or towns that would do things like kind of almost like take the town back into the larger town, or they would lose that identity, or they weren't getting funding and all these different things, right, that would cause them to fall apart. I've even seen TikToks where people talk about how entire areas were changed to like a lake. Like the city would
Wow.
be like, oh, we're going to take this and make it into literally a lake. And it's like, okay, that's absolutely disgusting. And so
Wow.
entire towns have just like vanished off the map.
Wow.
But anyways, I say that to say,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when we were working with Eatonville, one of the reasons that Historifi came back to our minds and came to the forefront was because, they hired us and they're like, okay, we need you guys to drive foot traffic in, and we would create these campaigns around different events that they had, but also around this idea of, taking a day trip out there. But it became more and more just like abundantly clear to us that no matter what we did as marketers,
Mm-hmm.
you've got to give people a reason, right? A reason to want to stay and to actually spend money in these towns if that foot traffic is actually going to boost the economy there and actually make a
Mm.
difference. And so, as we were working on that project, then, we started having more and more conversations. I was like, Historifi could help with this. If that, if Historifi existed, it could help to be something that people travel to these different locations to experience. So that's the idea of Historifi was born, and it's basically an augmented reality app where users can hold up their phone and see areas as they once were, look at a building and see what it may have looked like years ago, but also interact with really fun characters that are people that, think of Pokemon Go, right? With Pokemon Go, people go around and they find Pokemon, but here you'll be able to go around and actually talk to people who are, from that time period, and they'll tell stories and they'll talk about things that happened there. So yeah, super excited about that. And again, the time was right. I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah.
And so I've been, pursuing getting that started.
That is sick. That is so sick, because you're right. I think, like, you're right. The best comparison is Pokemon Go. I remember one time, my lady and I, we drove out to, I forget man, I'm blanking on where the park was, but there's supposed to be a concert going on there, but it's a really big park, and there's one area where the concert was happening, and then the rest is just like people just walking around doing park stuff, or so I thought. So, and it's crazy how this lined up. We drive up to the park, and before we get out the car, I'm like, hey, you know what? Why don't we just have a conversation? Why don't we have a walk in the park without our phones, right? So we leave our phones in the car. I suggest, like, let's just leave our phones in the car, and nothing's gonna happen. There's always what if somebody calls and, like, the house is on fire? Nothing's gonna happen. It's fine. So we leave the phones in the car and we start walking, and everybody is like this. For those that you are listening, my head is just straight down and everyone's on their phone, right? But that's normal, right? You go on a train or you go anywhere, that's normal, right? But what was happening was, as I was walking by everyone's playing Pokemon Go. And I swear to you, Jazz, I can't make up how creepy this was. It felt like an episode of Black Mirror. Like, it felt like an episode of Black Mirror, I'm telling you. Like, it was so weird. And it was at that moment, I was like, we are being seriously programmed. Like, we are lab rats in an experiment that we are not privy to. Like, this is happening. So I like that your app is providing an educational twist to it, and it's pretty sick if you go to, like, Montgomery, Georgia or something like that, and you talk to Dr. King. That would be crazy.
Yes. Now, obviously, legal rights pending,
right?
But our hope is definitely that we'll be able to have a representation of some real people as well as some fictional characters. And, to your point, what I also love about Historifi is that it's going to help to also bridge the gap between the augmented or the virtual world and the world that we're in right now, because our whole goal is not only to get people to these towns, right? Because we're going to focus specifically on towns that have a story to tell that has either been erased or in some way lost, right? And specifically for Black towns and Indigenous areas as well. And so really about reclaiming that history and preventing that erasure. But what I love about what we're doing is we're not just going to, you won't just have people heads down like when they're playing Pokemon Go. The goal will be, we'll have different interactive features that's going to get them into the doors of the different places there. So, when they're talking to the characters, they'll talk to them, but it's going to lead them on a journey that's going to have them going in and out of the different stores and restaurants that are in the area, and truly exploring and even incentivizing them to spend money there, to spend time there, and to actually pour into the economy that's there.
Yeah.
So you will see some people walking around with their heads down, but they will then have to look up at some point to actually go in and interact with the stores and the places there.
Wow. That's that's amazing. That's a really, really, really strong idea. And clearly Build with Tulsa thought so. Cause yeah, you uh
Yes.
yes, you gave a pitch at the female founders pitch night and you won
Yes.
second place, 5 grand to put towards Historifi.
Yes.
What did that
Yeah.
process actually consist of? Like actually creating a pitch? I've never created a pitch, so I'm curious.
Yeah. So to lead into that, to lead into my answer, I'll give a
Hmm.
little bit of context
Sure.
with the program itself and everything.
Yeah.
So, for everyone listening, you guys have no clue who I am, but I actually moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, because they have a lot of different programs here. They're trying to rebuild, trying to get people who work in tech, especially entrepreneurs, creatives, here in Tulsa. And so that was part of the reason why I came here, because I knew I had a lot of ideas and I knew I had a lot of things I wanted to do. So I came here with a program called Tulsa Remote, and I'm their biggest cheerleader, so I have to put in a little plug that you should definitely check that out. They will pay you, or they'll pay people who are working remotely, $10,000 to move to Tulsa. And so that has been, such a game changer in my life. And, it's just an up and coming place. But with that, like you said, Build in Tulsa is an organization that's here, and they are geared specifically towards helping to, helping uh, entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs, to be able to build and grow here in Tulsa. And so they hold a female founders pitch night every few months. And with me being laid off, I was like, now's the time. I'm going to go for it. And so as I was preparing for the pitch, what I really liked about this program in particular was the fact that they didn't just say, okay, make a pitch and that's it. They really hold your hand through the process. So they gave us a template, just kind of like a generic template, but then they were also a resource to kind of like be a soundboard to make sure we had all of the components. So it was things like putting together slides that talked about, the overview of what we're trying to do, the problem we're solving for, what that solution looks like, who's on the team. You want to paint the picture that, you've got a team going, or you've got at least, some advisors in the wing, the wings that can help guide you. So it's showing that it's more than just an idea. Although everybody that was participating was at various different stages, but you still have to showcase that you've thought through a lot of things. So it was figuring out that. It was also looking at the data, right? You can't just tell people, hey, I've got this great idea. When it's a pitch competition, or, eventually getting actual investors, you've got to paint the picture that you've thought through who this could potentially appeal to, what that market looks like, that market size. And so, there was just a lot of like terminology around, the market size and the share of the market that I had to look into and really paint the picture of, okay, here's our entire potential market. Um, and oh my gosh, my brain is like drawing a blank now, but it was and the acronyms were TAM, SAM, and SOM. Um, it was total available market, and then serviceable available market, and then whittling that down even further. Um, and so it was, really just trying to look at those things and getting intentional about, like, okay, more than just the idea. Let me be very specific about who is going to be, actually a user. But then having to look at, with Historifi, there's going to be different ways that we make revenue as an app, and so having to explain that, your revenue model was another big one that we had to showcase. And I'd say, as I was putting it together, probably the hardest part was getting all of that down and then editing it to saying the gist in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that was the hardest part for me. I'm a talker. I will talk. um and so it was just trying to figure out, like, what do I want to really say and say in a compelling way where I'm giving some numbers, but I'm also telling a story and I'm pulling them in on this journey with me. And I'm leaving them asking questions, but I'm also answering some of the basic questions that they'll have so that they know that I've got my stuff together, you know?
Yeah. Nice. I love that breakdown. And did you have to present it in front of them, or was it a recorded pitch?
I had to present it in front of them. So I all throughout COVID and, the height of the pandemic and everything,
Mm.
I was locked away. And then, through that, all of my jobs have been remote. And so I've gone out of the house sometimes, but I definitely haven't, done a lot of the level of like public speaking that I had done prior to the pandemic. So
Nice.
I was a little rusty, and I'm not going to lie. I was a little bit scared. I was like, "Oh my gosh. I haven't talked in front of people in a while, let alone 200 people in a room."
Yeah.
And then
Oh.
the front row is just the judges, and they're staring right at you.
Like
So
American Idol? Like they're just like in the front?
yes, exactly. Literally a panel of judges. It was 4 judges, and they're right in front of you.
Oh
So I was
man.
like, "Oh man." But I had to practice and practice. And the good thing was, again, with the program or the competition that I did with Build in Tulsa, they gave us practice rounds that we could actually go into the actual venue and stand on the stage and practice doing it. So I was like, okay. I did that a couple times, and that got the jitters out. But yeah, sharing an idea in front of that many people can be very nerve-wracking, especially when so much is on the line. I'm sure you can, definitely relate to the fact that when you have your ideas, right, like, they mean a lot to you because they can be successful and you want to see them through. And so
Right.
knowing that, like, how well you convey that
Mm-hmm.
can help you get to where you need to go can be a lot of
Yeah.
pressure for sure. But
Yeah.
it was still a good time. So
I've found, like, telling people about this platform, and the thing is, when people ask about the Visionaries Only, they're like, "Oh, it's a podcast, great," and I'm like, "Yes, that's how it starts, but the full vision is much larger. But I don't have time to explain the entire thing to you." So I've been having a tough time distilling it, like you said, like down to its like core
Mhm.
ideas, so that it's palatable for most people. And this is a terrible example, but I've likened it to trying to, like, tell your homegirl, like me trying to tell my homegirl about my friend and why I think they might make a good match. And it's like, yeah, he's really nice. He's really cool. Like
Uh,
we watch sports together. Like it always comes out very awkward when I'm trying to explain it. So that's why I'm like, that's why I'm so interested in how you felt like the pitch went. So when you were done, you had gone through all this practice
mhm,
rounds. Did you feel like when you delivered it,
mhm.
obviously the judges felt great, but you personally, how did you feel when you actually finished?
Hmm. Well, first off, we're gonna have to sideline and circle back at some point to take it offline. If you've got homeboys that you can hook me up with, let me know. But no, that's a hilarious example because, yeah, I mean, it's an awkward feeling, right? Like,
Yeah.
it definitely, I felt so much pressure of, like, trying to convey, like, this really is a good idea and you're gonna love it. I know you'll love it. Just like when you're playing matchmaker. But yeah, I think the best thing for me, or what I realized, especially after the fact, was that you've got to go through the process of, like, take the big version, right? Say it all, write it all out, I can't tell you how many decks I went through of like just putting everything down, right? Okay, this is, if I was going to tell somebody every little detail I've ever thought of, right? This is how it would be. And that was way too long and it was always way too much. But then that allowed me the space to then take it down and take it down and take it down. So then by the time I got on stage in front of them, I had thought it through so many times. And that's such a good exercise because then it's almost like it connects the dots in your brain. You know, if you've taken the big version and you've whittled it down to the small version, your brain has those connections. So even when you're saying the small version, then when the time is right or when it's appropriate or when somebody asks a question, you already know how to like shoot up to the big version because you've got these connections in your head and you've already whittled it down. So, you know, there's so much, you know, I definitely can relate to the idea of like, you know, you said you know, this is a podcast, but it's so much more than that. And it's like, okay, yeah, Historifi is an augmented reality app, but it's so much more than that. And so, yeah, I had to go through that practice of doing that so that I could quickly say it if needed. But then even if I want to give a long version, it just helped me to better organize my thoughts by doing that. And then, of course, practice makes perfect, like they say. And I had to just practice saying it over and over again, even though I know it, right? Like it's you know, for Historifi, it's obviously a culmination of a couple of people's different ideas, but you know, but a lot of it was my ideas. And I'm like, you know, you want to think that you can just speak from the heart
Yeah.
when it's something that's that close to you. But no, you know, practicing saying the smaller version, the longer version, and everything in between, it helps to be able to articulate that and know when the moment is right to, you know, choose the right version.
Right. The movies have lied to us and said that you can just speak from your heart and it'll be okay. Like that, I have tried that on many of occasions and it just sounds like word vomit. And I'm like, man, I really should have practiced this before before I started talking. Like I've had that
Yeah.
experience on a couple of interviews where I was like, oh, like when I had an interview closer to when I got laid off, the information was just
Mhm.
rattling off. But the further I get from the job, and they're like, "So what did you do back in Flatiron School?" I'm like, "Man, I started a podcast." Like it's like
Yeah.
it's it's so much harder. But I think you're right. Like that practice is super critical. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious when you pitched the idea. You said there was a lot of people in a room. I'm assuming like there's a lot of like entrepreneurs, a lot of people that have somewhat of
Yeah.
a stake in the success of entrepreneurs on that stage.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious
Yep.
when you got done. I'm sure people came up to you, started talking to you, and stuff like that. Um,
Mhm.
wh- what was some of the feedback that you got from maybe not just the judges, but just from people all around in the room?
It was great. The feedback was great. And I think you had said earlier, and I probably didn't quite answer it, but now it's like coming to my head of like how I felt afterwards. And, you know, before I knew that I won second place, it was like an out of body, you know, it's like I went through it. I knew that I hit all the marks, but still
Mhm.
there was a certain element of like feeling like, how did that come across? What did I look like? Like, you know, like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
still like thinking through like, you know, was I speaking and projecting loud enough? All these things are, you know, still were going through my head or really even wondering how the general public perceived it. But
Mm.
afterwards, it was so great. There were so many people that came up and they're like, this is a great idea. You know, this is going to go far. There were some people who told me about different opportunities that I should pursue and, you
Oh,
know, try to look into to help take this to the next level. And so, yeah, I mean, it was really great. There were just so many people in the room, like you said, that specifically within the Tulsa community, you know, have an impact and can help. That it was really great to just be able to like have some people say like, "Hey, have you considered this? Have you done this?"
mhm.
But yeah, it was all really great and positive feedback, and that felt that
Yeah.
definitely felt good. You know, because again, you could just feel I felt so like even after like so immediately coming off the stage I was like I have no I like if somebody asked me how did that go, I'd say I did everything, I felt good about it, but there's, you know, still an element of like I don't know, just, it happens so fast.
Yeah.
um, and it's different to experience something to watch yourself do it. But I, especially felt good, of course, when I won, but then when people came up and they said that the idea resonated with them and that they were
Mm,
excited to see the next steps, then that really felt good. And it also was good for me, right? Because, it was another kind of just kick in the pants, right? To be like, go, you've got to see this through.
yeah.
Now you've come really far. You've got people excited.
Yeah.
Like, there's no option but for
Right.
success now. So yeah, so that was really, really good and very motivating for sure.
Mm. Yeah, you showed people the trailer. You got to make the movie now, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
exactly.
got to. uh,
Exactly.
um, without giving away too many trade secrets, where are you
Mhm,
in the process with Historifi?
mhm. Yeah. So, um, one of the things that I've learned about recently, especially moving here to Tulsa because they have so many, are accelerator programs. So we are actively seeking out accelerator programs, and these are programs for startup companies. A lot of them will do it, by industry. So we're looking specifically at tech startup accelerators, and they can help, make all the difference. A lot of large companies have used accelerators where it's basically a program that helps you get to the next step by connecting you with mentors as well as funding. Funding is huge, especially when building an app, because right now we are in the development process, right? So we have hired developers, and we're trying to get things moving forward that way with actually building the app. And with that, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but at the end of the day, it's gonna cost. so so it's one of those things where that's where we're at. Is funding is huge for us, so we're looking into funding in different ways, through investors. We might launch some crowdfunding campaigns soon, so stay tuned. But really just looking at how we can get some funds in from a couple of different streams, so that we can get this thing going sooner than later, because I really feel like now's the time. So fundraising is a big one, but we're really focused on trying to get into some of these accelerator programs, because again, before I had even thought about Historifi, I mean, there were other businesses that I've either started, or thought about starting, but they were never really in the tech space. And so a lot of this has been a learning opportunity to see, like, oh my gosh, there are accelerator programs or programs literally like, you have a good idea, we're going to help you get there, we're going to give you funding, we're going to put you with mentors, you're going to spend the next 3 months working on things. And so for anyone who's out there who has ideas, whether it's an app or I've even seen programs. There are accelerator programs, and there's also incubator programs. And so definitely look into each of those and see what's the best fit for you, because across the board with all different industries, there are these programs that exist that are to help these good ideas actually come into fruition. So that's the next step for us, as well as just really trying to get that funding up.
Yeah. I know you said you're working with developers. Do you have a product manager on deck that you're working with to help work with the help sort of roadmap the process?
So right now the team is very small, and it's with the team that we have, it is very hands on deck. I wouldn't say that we specifically right now have one project, or excuse me, one product manager. Um, but at the moment, I'm more of the technical co-founder. And so things like putting together the wireframes, putting together the mock-up of what we want the app to be, I've handled that aspect. With my graphic design background, I've been able to bridge that gap for now. But we'll see, because things are always changing and growing, and when we can bring on more help, and we may need to, right? Then we'll definitely do so. But right now, it's been kind of taking it one step at a time, and between my mom and myself, and I want to say, like, yeah, 4 other people. We've just been, just hustling and
Yeah.
using the resources and skill sets that we have. And
Nice.
luckily I have, dabbled on that side of things, in the sense of, I've always been in marketing, but I've also, managed campaigns, but I've also, designed websites. And so while I haven't designed an app per
Yeah.
se, I still know how to make a good wireframe. I still know how to kind of help manage that process. So,
Nice.
yeah, we're being scrappy right now.
Oh boy.
we're pulling together our resources.
Only a select amount of listeners will know why scrappy is a trigger word. No.
Oh, yes.
Trigger warning for any Flatiron schoolers. Trigger warning. I love Flatiron School. I have nothing bad to say about them. They're amazing.
Right. Love them.
Nothing bad
But
to
yes,
say.
but scrappy was one of those buzzwords. Every company has buzzwords.
Right. Every company has like one of the things on their mission or their values list that you're like, so
yeah.
So you know the tradition. I'm bringing it over from tech perspective. I'm bringing the tradition here.
Here we go.
You know what's coming. The question we ask every guest as we near the end, as Jaslyn Ferguson, what is a quote that you personally live by?
You would think I would be prepared.
I never think anyone is prepared for
How
this
did
question.
I not? Oh,
how did you not know?
But after all those tech perspective episodes where that's how we ended it, because that is
That's my trademark.
Shame on me.
That's my
You're gonna have to
trademark.
give me a second. Yes, that's your trademark. Like, how could I not come into this prepared for that? Let's see here. In all fairness to me, my house is a wreck right now. My pipes in my 1940s home are a wreck, and so I've had just construction workers and contractors and plumbers in and out of the house all day, so I feel a little scattered. But let me think. Let's see here. A quote that I live
You can
by.
Google it if you want.
I have one. Okay. Yeah, I am. I am. But I didn't even know what to Google for a second there. Okay, here we go. Okay. I have one.
All right.
This is one that I do live by.
It's in your heart, not in your head. It's in your heart.
Okay.
I get it.
Okay, so this is by none other than Fred Rogers himself, aka Mr. Rogers. And the quote is, "You've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are." And although, of course, he was saying this to children, so it may sound a bit juvenile, I think, even as adults, even as professionals, we have to remind ourselves of that and what makes us special and what makes us unique. And, each one of us has our passions and the things that we want to bring into this world. And we can't lose sight of that, right? Because just by being us, we're adding something to this world. So don't forget that you're special.
Love it.